Hello friends, my name is Santosh Bhandari. I am a student of Agriculture Science at Institute of Agriculture and Animal Science, Rampur campus, Rampur, Chitwan. As a part of Youth Climate Report, the Youth Express, I managed to talk to three persons, Professor Dr. Nawa, Devkota, Professor Dr. Shrawan, Saha, and Mr. Subodh. These persons are involved directly or indirectly uh, in different researches and the works related to climate change. Dr. Devkota is working on effects of climate change on the livestock production and productivity on different parts of the country. Dr. Saha is involved on effects of climate change on crop productivity, production, and similarly Mr. Khanal has recently concluded research on effects of climate change on the ecosystem services generated by the Bishajari Lake in the Arjun Chitwan. Uh, the interview, the talks are yes. About climate change.
Maybe start.
Start. What is your general understanding about the climate change?
Climate change is a very broad topic. It's lately defined as a kind of change in climatic variability actually. There are climatic parameters such as temperatures, rainfall, wind velocities, and then the speed of the wind or the associated effect in climatic pattern. So my understanding of change in climate is a different kind of school, different kinds of thought are there. Probably it could be a cyclic order, or it could be due to the man-made, human-made consequences on the climatic parameters that the situation people had experienced about 10, 20, 30 years ago. It's not exactly like today. There have been some consequences of changes in variability like the rainfall pattern, changes in the temperatures, changes in the kind of the cropping pattern, or shifting in the practices in agriculture. So all these are a kind of indication of climatic changes, and it's very difficult to address exactly how we can understand and how we can tackle all these issues, but it is necessary that we must address these changes and we must endorse the probable consequences of all these events so that we would be better able to adapt with this situation.
What are your general findings at the community level when you work with the local people?
Right. Yes, there are different types of experience because in our context the people do not keep record. For example, about how was the temperature last 10 years and how is now. At the effects of say during the peak of the summertime or the winter time, how was the rainfall pattern in last 20 years during the June, and how it has been shifted from the mid temperature or the mid rainfall pattern. It's shifted to the left or to the right in the curve. These things are not very clear. But the farmers do have their own kind of perception, what they think in general, in my opinion. There are some changes regarding agricultural practices, livestock production, the feeding management that are related with climatic variability, especially when there are consequences like heavy flooding, heavy powering of the rain, and that is unusual, that is not a regular, but it happens. So when it happens, the farmers would have been problem. How they can tackle with such situations? Say if the feed is deficit because of the drought, how they can manage? That's their experience. So in my experience, the farmers are not so sure about the exact pattern of change in climate, but they have been facing, they have been experiencing a kind of changes that they feel that is the departure from the normal practices.
Okay, then what kind of impacts, results, visual results have you seen?
Well, it's not easy because on the basis of only couple of years observation, you cannot say that these are the visual. In fact, there are confounding effect. For example, such changes might have occurred because of entirely changes in climatic variability, or because it's a regular pattern, because the human being has been moving towards the improved modern facilities, modern system of living, and agriculture is falling behind. So in that sense, you cannot actually say the consequences in the human natures, human impact and overall in the living system of the people. But what you can say, the people are aware of this fact and they have started to talk about these changes. And once these changes have started to take a kind of momentum, and probably we all scientists working in the lobbying field, the development workers working in the NGO sector, INGO sector, the academicians, we all should work together and try to solve the problem. So in my opinion, climate change should be taken as an immediate problem. For example, the short-term problem. This year, next year, in coming 5 years, how would be the scenario of the changing patterns and how it would affect in the normal behavior of the farming system, the people's activities, all these things, and so that we can make a certain plan, we can better able to address and understand the situation, so that there would be least risk factors and then much of the chances of addressing with the situation.
Then what could be the possible, general, feasible adaptation measures at the local level, at our level?
Right, these are a lot varied question because it's very difficult to answer exactly. You cannot say that these are the locally adapted measures, but quite long century ago farmers have been practicing against the harsh climatic condition. If the winter is very cold, they would use some kind of local measures to safeguard against the winter.
What is the general perception about climate change?
Climate is changing. It's now already proved. Various international agencies like IPCC, they are telling that the climate is changing rapidly now. This is what I perceive.
Apart from the global level, what kind of macroclimate changes do you have noticed in our context?
In our context also, we are observing the changes in the climate because we don't see one of the changes we are seeing in the rainfall pattern. The rainfall has become more erratic. In winter, previously there was some rains in winter. Now we are not observing rain during winter season. So this is the one changes. And also in the monsoon season, sometimes there is a heavy rainfall, and for some periods there is almost no rain or little rain. So there is also some shift in the rainfall pattern also. So there is a changes in the rainfall pattern. One, in Nepal, we need to analyze the at least 30-35 years data. We have analyzed in some of the research, and we are still working to analyze those data to see whether there is changes or not. But what we believe or perceive is there is changes in the rainfall pattern. This is the one changes. There is also changes in the temperature, especially after the winter. There is a little bit more rise in temperature than in the previous year. So there is changes in the temperature, there is changes in the rainfall, and we are listening from various sources that our snow on the Himalayas are melting. So these are some of the changes we are listening from several sources. We are observing, we are feeling. The urgent need is to analyze the data of the so many years to actually verify what we are perceiving is true or not.
What could be the short-term and the long-term impacts on the mostly on the agricultural production and particularly in cereal production?
Certainly, what we are seeing that if the monsoon do not come on time, then there is late planting of rice that would reduce the yield. If monsoon fails during the reproductive stage of rice, there is also less production of rice. So, because rice is the life in Nepal. Without rice, the Nepalese people cannot survive. And the effect we are observing, especially in the planting patterns, drought, heavy rain, sometimes in rice growing season. So these erratic changes, I think, would affect the rice production. Also in another crops, like in wheat, the early rise in temperature after the winter season would shorten the growth period of the wheat, reduce the yield of wheat. We are now thinking to develop stress tolerant, especially heat tolerant wheat varieties, heat and drought tolerant wheat varieties, so that we can adapt with the climate change. So certainly there is going to be water sources are declining. This is another changes we are observing due to the increased temperature, higher evaporation rate. So water sources are declining, and that would affect the crop production.
What could be the possible adaptation measures for those kind of impacts?
You see, it would require lot of research. It would require lot of research to find out that what would be the best adaptation measure for the climate change. One thing that may be very important is to develop the cultivars that would be resistance to the stress condition, especially heat and drought stress. So this is the one area, one researchable area where the scientists should work. This is one. The another is the changes in the planting patterns. Now again we have to do some kind of research to find out that in context with the climate change, what kind of change we can do in the planting dates of the rice, wheat and maize. The another major point is we should now think for the resource conserving technology, because the resources are depleting, because if the monsoons are not coming on right time, then that would lead to the poor yield. So we need to adopt the conservation agriculture. So we have to, in conservation agriculture, the one thing is tillage. So in case of the tillage, we need to minimize the tillage operations. So we have to go for the dry direct seeding of the rice, direct seeding of the wheat, surface seeding of the wheat, zero till maize. We have to manage the crop residues. We need to diversify the cropping patterns. So this could ultimately lead to the better adaptation to the climate change.
Lately we have seen some notions like sustainable development practice, green economy, organic farming. Are these solutions for all this?
No. What I think is those words may be catchy, but we need sustainable intensification of the agriculture. So I am not talking only about the sustainable agriculture, but we need sustainable intensification of agriculture. This is the time we have to think. We have to minimize the impact of climate change on the environment. At the same time, we have to improve the productivity and number of crops or animals in the field so that we can feed the growing population of the nation. So what I think is sustainable intensification of agriculture is necessary, not those catchy words of the sustainable agriculture, but sustainable intensification of agriculture.
What are the last message to the global community?
I think sustainable intensification of agriculture would be the message. I think so.
Okay, thank you so much, sir, for your time.
Thanks.
Is climate change real?
Yes, of course, climate change is real because it is one of the most contemporary issue of this modern world. Depending upon the perception of local people as well as scientific community, it has been scientifically proven as well. If we take in consideration about various findings such as from findings of Subodh in context of Nepal, the average climate rising temperature is about 0.2 to 0.6 degrees centigrade, and it can be further illustrated that climate change can be taken place by the evidences such as the melting of ice caps, similarly rising of sea level, and similarly the crops, as we talk about the agricultural crops, they have been shifting upwards. And if we talk about the species extinction and moreover the shift of species such as mosquitoes are being seen in higher altitude as well. With all those evidences, we can say that climate change is real. It is not just an issue.
These are the general empirical findings throughout the world.
Yeah.
But what have you seen in the community at the ground level, in the grassroots level?
Talking in the grassroots level, the vulnerability of people is being increased towards the climate change because they are resource limited and they have very little capacity to cope with the climate change and its impact as well.
What are the findings from the research? What kind of impacts have you seen?
Talking about the findings which I have just concluded with my research is that I was most focused with ecosystem services. I have seen that the provisioning services is being depleted as a result of climate change. Provisioning services means the service which are the direct benefits we obtain from our ecosystem. The level of services is being decreased. Similarly, other services have been also deteriorating, and the level of capacity to cope, they have very few level of adaptations and they are vulnerable to climate change. These are some findings of my research.
What could be the adaptation measures or the mitigation measures for such impacts?
The most adaptation measures, if we talk about the local level, the first and foremost is that there should be the diversity in their livelihood, because depending upon one source makes them vulnerable. Similarly, if we increase the level of biodiversity, the ecosystem level adaptation can be enhanced. Similarly, there are some examples throughout the world. For example, it is a bit funny, but I found in the case of Niger that as there is a very little availability of water, during the marriage, the women are given donkey as dowry to fetch water from longer distance. And if we talk about the examples of Nepal, the Thatighar, or in English we call it stilt house, they have been building, and houses are being built on rice beds. Similarly, if we talk about agriculture, mulching, and several other practices can be the example of adaptation at local level towards climate change.
What could be the mitigation measures?
Mitigation measures is very hard at a local level. Mitigation measures, first and foremost, there must be a clear mechanism to control the global carbon emission. I want to share something about our country. Nepal is responsible for only 0.025% of global carbon emission, but the impact is very high. And if we talk about the carbon emissions, there are two countries who are most responsible. One is US and other is China. And unless they make some policy in their respect, it is very hard to mitigate. And there are some certain policies at international level. They have not been implemented. First and foremost, the policies which are global in nature must be implemented, and the global carbon emission must be reduced or at least stabilized. Moreover, if we need some additional policies, it should be signed. And moreover, other thing is that zero waste energy and green economy must be enhanced. Similarly, there are various other ways, but first and foremost, we must go green. We must less depend on fossil fuels. We must search alternate source of energy. These are some measures for the climate change control or mitigation as well.
What is your message to the global community?
The first, I have very few messages. First is that we must think and act green, and it's now or never.